Okay, this is Biopsychology Lesson 1. This is the study of the brain and how it produces behaviour and mental processes. We're going to have a quick look at the specification first, just so you're clear on what you're going to be covering for the next few lessons. So you can see here with the specification highlighted in pink is the first lesson today. We're going to be covering the divisions of the nervous system, central and peripheral. So very introductory, and then you can see the next 3 lessons there on the board. The fight or flight response, the last one, is the only section here where you're going to be covering AO3. So the first 3 bullet points are just knowledge, they're just AO1. Obviously, that does mean you can get an application question, AO2 question on those topics. So that's applying your knowledge to a scenario. But the only evaluation, the only AO3 here is the fight or flight response. So the first activity you're going to be covering today is you're going to try and brainstorm, see what you can remember from the biological approach, any key assumptions to explain human behaviour. So how does the biological approach attempt to explain behaviour? And it's even better if you can identify a weakness of explaining behaviour from this perspective. Note that down as well. So you just need a pen and paper right now, and you're just going to try and brainstorm without any help, without any notes. You're going to have 3 minutes to complete this task. Okay, so once your 3 minutes is up, let's have a little memory jog of some of those key assumptions. So I'm not going to read all of this out because you're more than all capable of reading this. So some of the points that you might have noted down are things like genetics, passed down through generations, chemical, hormonal changes, and also don't forget you've got evolution here as part of the biological approach as well. So that's adaptive behaviours that have passed down that aid our survival, in other words. So this is kind of like your introductory, your base foundation understanding of where the biological approach is coming from. So what you're going to do next is open your booklets up. On the first page inside your booklets, you've got a series of questions that go hand in hand with this video. So I'm going to play this video and you're going to try and take note and try and answer some of those questions based on what the video states.
Every moment of the day, neural messages speed through the nervous system. These messages bring us information about our environment and enable us to respond to it. Thinking and communication are made possible by the synchronization of millions of neural signals. Let's take a look at how the brain and the rest of the nervous system work together to make all this possible. The basic signaling unit of the nervous system is the neuron. Neurons are cells, but unlike other cells in the body, neurons are able to conduct electrochemical signals. Another difference is that neurons are irregular in shape and have a number of extensions. Most neurons have only one axon, an extension that carries messages away from the cell. Although a neuron's body is usually from 5 to 100 micrometers in diameter, axons can range in length from 1 millimeter to as long as 1 meter. On the other side of the neuron cell body are short extensions called dendrites that branch like trees. A single neuron can have anywhere from 1 to 20 dendrites. Each dendrite has many short knobby structures called dendritic spines. These spines greatly increase the surface area that the dendritic tree has for receiving signals from other neurons.
A single neuron can be contacted by as many as 10,000 other neurons. Together, a network of billions of these interconnected neurons makes up the complex circuitry that is our nervous system.
When receptors in the dendrites are activated, they send tiny electrical currents that combine at the axon hillock. This generates an action potential, an electrical impulse that carries the neural message down the axon. Each axon may have several branches at the end, called axon terminals. Between the tip of an axon terminal and the dendrites of the target neuron, there is a tiny gap called a synapse. It measures from 10 to 20 nanometers across. Neurotransmitters carry chemical messages between neurons. The presynaptic neuron, the one sending a message, releases neurotransmitters across the synapse. After crossing the synapse, each neurotransmitter binds to a particular receptor on the postsynaptic neuron, the one receiving the message. This activates that neuron's receptors, beginning the electrochemical process again. Neurons carry messages to muscle fibers, blood vessels, glands, and other organs. All of this happens very fast, of course. In fact, in 1 second, nerve impulses can travel up to 120 meters. That's more than the length of an entire football field. The nervous system is divided into two parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, which lie within the bones of the skull and vertebral column. The peripheral nervous system includes all the rest of the nervous system. The brain is divided into 4 major functional areas: the cerebrum, diencephalon, brainstem, and cerebellum. The 2 halves of the cerebrum, called the cerebral hemispheres, form the largest portion of the brain. They are covered by the cerebral cortex, a dense layer of neurons about 3 millimeters thick, the gray matter of the brain. Underneath this is the white matter, a much deeper layer of fiber tracts that travel to and from the cortex. In each hemisphere, the cerebral cortex is divided into 4 lobes. The frontal lobe controls thinking, speech, emotion, and the planning and production of movements. The occipital lobe receives and interprets input from the eyes. Primary auditory input goes to the temporal lobe, which interprets it as sound. The temporal lobe also plays a role in feeling emotion, perceiving form and color, understanding speech, and in the sense of smell. The parietal lobe receives sensory messages from the skin, joints, and muscles and interprets them as pain, touch, and the position of our arms and legs in space. Auditory and visual inputs are integrated with these messages. Beneath the cerebral hemispheres are the thalamus and the hypothalamus, known together as the diencephalon. All inputs from the sense organs, except those associated with smell, synapse on the nuclei in the thalamus, which then relays the information to the cerebral cortex. The functions of the hypothalamus include control of some hormones and integration of the functions of the autonomic nervous system. Below the diencephalon is the brainstem. Areas in the brainstem play a role in many basic functions, including control of breathing in your circulatory system, perception of pain, regulation of body temperature, and the organization of simple movements.
Throughout the length of the brainstem is a web-like network of neurons called the reticular formation that relates to cardiovascular and respiratory control, sleep, consciousness, and alertness. Because it controls such critical functions, Damage to the brainstem can be fatal.
Behind the brainstem is the cerebellum. It performs several critical functions, including coordination of movements, maintenance of posture, and the learning of motor skills. The medulla, which is the lowest part of the brainstem, transitions to the spinal cord through an opening at the base of the skull. The spinal cord is enclosed within the spinal vertebrae. Axons from neurons in the brain travel down the spinal cord and out to their targets through the peripheral nerves. These axons are organized in bundles within fiber pathways called fiber tracts. The nerves that exit the spinal cord are part of the peripheral nervous system, which has two divisions: the somatic nervous system, made up of the motor nerves that activate the skeletal muscles, and the autonomic nervous system, made up of the nerves that regulate the internal organs and glands, the unconscious functions of the body. Commands from the brain travel down the spinal cord and out to muscles and internal organs. Sensory input from the body travels up the spinal cord to the brain.
Okay, so for that video, I'm just going to go through the answers now to questions 1 to 10 in your booklet. So question 1, you should have got a neuron. Question 2, you should have had, they send tiny electrical currents to the axon hillock. This then creates an action potential, which is an electrical impulse that carries the neural message to the axon terminal. Number 3 should have been neurotransmitters carry the messages. 4, this activates the electrochemical process again. Question 5, you should have had brain and spinal cord. 6, cerebral hemispheres. 7, frontal, temporal, occipital, and parietal lobe. 8, control of hormones and integration of the functions of the autonomic nervous system. 9, somatic and autonomic nervous system. And lastly, 10, you should have had regulates internal organs and glands, the unconscious functions of the body. Okay, so the next activity in your booklets, as you can see, you have divisions of the nervous system, central and peripheral. You've got some boxes, blank boxes to fill in. I'd like you to use your textbook to help you and aid you in filling this information in. Okay, so your answers for the divisions of the nervous system are here on the slide. So you know the divisions of the central nervous system are spinal cord and brain. Peripheral, the main ones are autonomic, like we've just said in the introductory questions, and somatic. And then the division, further division, which you're not going to be looking at until the fight or flight response properly, is the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Now, it's all very well knowing this, but you do need to know the function of each very briefly as well. This will really help you distinguish the differences between them as well. Just going to leave this up for a while for you just to read and digest, and if you want to make any notes in your booklets, feel free to. Okay, so once you've digested that, we're just going to have a very quick overview of the introductory of the nervous system that we've just been through. So really just a way to remember the difference between the two major divisions, the CNS and the PNS. So if we can think of the CNS as the core processing unit, receiving, processing, and initiating output signals. Whereas the PNS is the carrier of this input and output information from the CNS to the rest of the body. So it's a communication system, if you like. And obviously we know there are two aspects of the PNS, a motor and sensory system. So the input signals are made up from sensory information from the PNS, and the output signals eventually lead to motor functions transmitted to various muscles. So hopefully that that kind of summarises, if you like, the core lessons and the differentiation between CNS and PNS in this lesson for you. In terms of what you need to do now as part of this lesson, I'd like you to complete page 3 of your work booklets. So that includes the questions, outline the role of the central nervous system for 4 marks, and outline the role of the autonomic nervous system for 4 marks. Your homework in preparation for lesson 2 is to read the chapter on neurons and synaptic transmission.